Okay, now welcome everybody to the latest in the Smarter Operations series of webinars. Today we're going to draw together a number of themes that we've done over the last 3-4 weeks as we get through to breaking free of productivity lock. Let's get the welcomes out of the way. So first of all, I'm Richard Higginbotham. I'm co-founder of Optism. We help clients reduce capacity, release capacity, reduce cost and enhance capability by working smarter with their processes. And I'm delighted to be joined, as I have been throughout this series, by friend and technology partner Ramesh from Civita.
Hey Richard, pleasure to be here. Hi everyone, I'm Ramesh, one of the co-founders of Civita. We focus on enabling organizations with digital workers, who can take on a lot of boring stuff and automate it. We'll speak more of it as time goes.
Very good. So let's get cracking. Format will be as it has been throughout. This is lunch and learn. We're trying to respect everybody's time, so we will try and make sure everybody gets away by 1 o'clock. Typically, we talk for about 15-20 minutes, and then we have some time at the end for question and answers. I know last week we had a number of very good questions, so we went afterwards. We'll carry on as long as we're getting questions, so we're absolutely fine. Anytime you want to raise anything, use the Q&A button within the app, and we'll pick those up as we go. But let's get cracking and let's get to the point of what we're here to talk about today. So, productivity lock is a term we've used in the previous webinars, and we call it it's the inability to remove those repetitive, low-level tasks that tie down valuable human resource. Some work that McKinsey carried out a couple of years ago now, where they analysed activities across the modern economy. They reckon that 30% of all working hours is spent doing data processing, data admin tasks that could be easily automated using technology today. Led us to kind of think, well, why is that? And what's constraining it, but actually also what's the impact on productivity. And it's those tasks that they're manual, they require very little judgment, and they tie down knowledge, they tie down expertise, they constrain the innovation and creativity, and it's people who are held there with their fingers on keyboards and their eyes scanning across twin screens. So what causes productivity lock? Well, there's a couple of contributing factors. It's the cost of removing it, and with cost comes risk, and the fact that a new system, a new platform can't get to everything. Now, something Ramesh and I have talked about at length on and off these webinars is how long it takes to implement and deliver a new platform, a new system. And I say it's months to deliver. I think we've probably both worked on programs that lasted an awful lot longer than that, haven't we, Ramesh?
Absolutely. What starts off as something small can carry on for a long time, but more importantly, the return on investment of such programs, the delay that it causes is painful.
Yeah, and what takes the time, it's not just the development, it's the analysis, the specification, the testing, the implementation. It's managing what goes on around that change at the same time. And once you start change, it's a never-ending continuum, isn't it?
Correct. And I think the whole, the word transformation itself, we speak about that because you're in many ways looking at an existing way of working and trying to redefine a new way of working. So not only are the systems changing, but the way people work, the change around that, and the technology that enables it. So there's a whole form, change in everything that you do.
Yeah. And with change comes uncertainty. So, I mean, this 71% of projects failing to deliver their goals it's an inflammatory statement, I think, from IBM. But if we're trying to forecast where we're going to be 3 months, 6 months from today, in particularly from today, it's really difficult to predict what's on the other side of it. And so you get the investment signed off based on a set of returns. It's very difficult to actually realize those returns. And I guess that creates a barrier for a small, medium organization who are very much focused on what their cash position is going to be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months down the line, and what their year-end cash position is going to be. If you're going to be talking about 6 figures of investment to implement a new platform, that's a big burden to bear, where there's a high risk over those returns, isn't there?
Correct. And that again goes back to the conundrum of, do technology systems necessarily solve all your problems? Probably not. You still need multiple things to work together effectively to solve your business process.
Yeah, and we've yet to see a transformation that doesn't leave some form of activity that's still manual. Supplier systems that don't fully integrate with the new platform, client systems that don't fully integrate with the new platform, those tasks that still require an element of human intervention to make the workflow happen. So yeah, there's always some residual tasks. Change creates new tasks. Thinking of a firm and an organization we've been working with over a good deal of time, they've invested an awful lot on system-based automated workflows that have taken away a lot of admin roles. So there's in some cases there isn't the support team there, but they're a knowledge-based business, and fee-earning staff now have tasks that they need to complete because there isn't the support staff to do it. But those tasks are quite often those repetitive tasks requiring little judgment that ties them down. We also see a different type of job role emerge. It's those people who are usually thought of as extremely valuable within the organization, who are constantly busy, may have 10, 12 more things to do every single day to make the whole operation work. But actually what they're doing is they're turning their hand to multiple residual or consequential tasks that actually, when you analyze those tasks, requires very little judgment to do. And those people are incredibly knowledgeable about the operation that they work in. They're the go-to person to get things done. They can potentially be single points of failure within that operation, but actually that's usually very knowledgeable and very capable resource that's really fingers on keyboards and eyes on twin screens. I mean, you see that a lot as well, Ramesh?
Exactly. In fact, when we talk about any business today, it's not only your internal processes which require these fingers and keyboards. Sometimes when you interface with a third party or your customer or your supplier, you're often needed to perform activities with their systems or their processes that need coordination, and that's exactly where these kind of resources become a key part of your equation.
And so these manual tasks, they don't get done by the platform. You need people around the edge, and so robotic process automation has been kind of positioned by a number of software vendors as almost something of a silver bullet within there. But that technology is specifically geared towards releasing human capacity, releasing those tasks. Now, we've introduced Joe previously in previous webinars, but Ramesh, very quickly, just tell us who Joe is.
Well, Joe is our friendly robotic worker. So think of Joe as just like a part of your team, but the only difference being that Joe works 24/7 without taking a break. So literally any activity that you would need someone to perform on a computer that's repetitive, that's boring, you can get Joe to do it. And to all the examples we talked about in the previous slide, whether it is updating different systems where there are residual tasks or which need coordinate between multiple processes across various systems or documents, just train Joe to do it, and Joe does it at a very, very high speed very quickly.
So we've shown in a couple of examples that we've worked with as clients how Joe is employed as a user in the same way as a human is, but is actually doing that work much faster. And some really common examples that we come across is that capturing of inbound work. It's work that it's requests for work that arrives on email through client portals, that requires somebody to load it up onto operational systems so that it can be issued to engineers, so that it can be issued to fee earners in a legal practice, that it can go to caseworkers in a charity. It's the stuff that's feeding the engine of the business, that's tying down people actually getting it loaded up in a way. In other cases, it's dealing with outcomes and then moving it on to the next level. But again, it's repetitive work, it's fingers on keyboards, and Joe is merely requiring a login and a username to be able to carry that work out in the same way as a human. Now, Joe's faster and has a number of other advantages. How much faster typically is Joe than a human user, Ramesh?
Depends on the type of process, but very easily on an average between 10 to 20 times as fast as what humans can process data on a system.
Yeah.
So, but interestingly, Richard, there's one more point here. A lot of times, when we talk about Joe and we talk about automation, there is a question in the head that, why is this different? I have a, system that automates my invoices. So where's Joe different? I guess it's to what you just explained. Joe has the ability to take a process end to end. So for example, when you talked about let's take, for example, there is, we are working with a solicitor firm where they get a number of transactions in their email system, where the data needs to be taken, processed in their internal system, and they need to keep some third parties informed as well. So Joe can be literally trained to go into your email box at a specified time, pick up all the transactions that come in, take the data out from the respective files, log in automatically into your internal systems, update the data, log in into a third party system parallelly, update the data there, and create a report of everything that has been done. So think of Joe as actually a human worker in a digital form. That's pretty much it. And Joe works end to end.
And because it works end to end, there's also a robot can turn up in the middle of the night and do
absolutely
before the start of play the next day. The robot can work weekends, bank holidays. It gives you a number of opportunities to transform the way that an operation works. So we've seen that robotic process automation, Joe, a robot, can release some of this work that's tied up in the 30% of working hours being done manual work. But actually then the other side of it is, if we're going to release productivity lock, it's about being able to make a decision to do something and achieve those benefits in a realistic time frame. And in our earlier webinar, we talked about the change stack, or the to-do list that exists for IT development, and the three separate bins. The first bin, which is big strategic change with implementing new systems, changing business models. The second one, which is making changes to existing systems and improving and optimizing. And then that third queue, which is the candidate changes that sit there waiting for their case to be the next highest priority to get worked on. There's a danger with any technology that if there's a big upfront investment, it creates time delays and it creates these change queues, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And so we've talked about the different delivery options. So building internal capability, which is the way that I know a lot of large financial institutions, utility companies, the big retailers, big law firms, central government, have all gone down this route of invest in the technology, invest in a large team of analysts and project managers, the infrastructure, go and find where these manual tasks are, and over a period of 18 months, 2 years, generate millions of pounds worth of cost saving benefit to the organization. That's great for a massive organization that can capitalize those projects, that can look at returns over 2 and 3 years. It's a bit tougher for a smaller organization. There is the option to build with a partner, so it may cost more, but you can bring forward that term. I know, Ramesh, you have some views on this.
Exactly. I mean, both options are viable options, but like you rightly said, it depends on the scale and size of the operations you have. In fact, even building with a partner, I would attribute to a large organization, because again, it talks about where, you have a lot of business activities going on, that your focus on an automation program, would detract from your operational focus. So you would actually get a partner involved to look at your processes and bring in automation. It works very well where you have scale, where you have volumes, and where you have a significant number of processes to automate. And eventually you might build with a partner and build internal capability, in parallel over a few years as well. So both models work, but definitely not for the SMB space.
Yeah. And I guess that's really underpinning productivity lock is the technology exists, the means to remove these manual tasks, the means to reduce the cost and increase capacity all exist, but it's the time to delivering the return on investment in that technology that provides the barrier. So for a small, medium organization, for a not-for-profit organization, it's governed by the cash that's available now and the results this quarter, this financial year. 9 to 18 months waiting for returns just isn't viable. And so that means that a project isn't initiated and those hours continue to be done. And it rolls forward and forward and forward. A good example of breaking out of this is an organization we work with who are, they're a charity. And maybe not the kind of the profile of organization that would maybe you'd associate with technological innovation, but they are, I guess, only too aware of their constraints. So Power are a health charity. They provide mental health advocacy. They are predominantly statutory funded, which means that there are defined limits on how they can allocate funds that are given to them by local authorities and the NHS. So there is an absolute constraint on the difference between service delivery and service support. Now, Power have a help hub, which is where they handle their inbound calls, coordinate their caseworkers, and capture the inbound referrals. When we came to look at their help hub, we started to appreciate just how much of a challenge capturing those inbound referrals was. And I would say probably 30–40% of the available resource was bound up with capturing manually information provided from health professionals, care professionals, and piled into the organization, getting it onto their operational system so it can be issued to caseworkers for them to work on. We're also in difficult times. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the way that they work. Is suddenly that help hub is no longer a 1 or 2 office operations. It's staff scattered to the four winds working from home remotely. And the new referrals, crisis referrals, have seen a 5 to 10-fold increase. Now, what they've been able to do is they saw the possibilities in freeing up that call centre resource to be able to devote more time to helping service users and coordinating their caseworkers. So they've deployed Joe on a couple of processes within that call centre. And I think the results have been quite extraordinary in terms of the speed to delivery and also that increased capacity. I think I'm right in saying, Ramesh, that it took us a couple of weeks to automate the crisis referral process.
Exactly. I mean, it took us a couple of weeks to go from discussion to deployment, which included 4 days of testing. So, the development itself was done in a week. And one of the key points here, Richard, is also the fact that, if not for automation, if not for Joe, what Power would have to do was obviously, the volumes were significantly increasing. They had to hire people to do this manual activity. But in the times that we now, where getting people trained remotely is not that easy. And, it's COVID, remote working is fine for the existing workforce because they knew what needs to be done. But when you get somebody new and have to be trained, it takes time and it's complex. So this was super easy because they had their existing workforce focus on what was needed. And Joe could actually help them just whiz through the increased volume without them having any impact on their ways of working.
Yeah, and it's also important to them as well because they're in a competitive marketplace. There are a number of other advocacy organisations, and they're all bidding for the same contracts. Is being able to have more humans dedicated towards service delivery gives them a big advantage in that competitive tendering scenario. So yeah, being able to release the human capacity is enormous to them.
Yeah.
So it is about that fresh approach to delivering robotic process automation. It's deploy process as a service. It's micro outsourcing, but that zero or minimal upfront cost means that benefit can be realized the moment that the process goes live, which creates a new scenario, doesn't it? And as we've found, not just with Power, but with many organizations that we've worked with, is once you've delivered one process, there's then 4 or 5 more candidate processes queued up because people can see the possibilities for it.
Exactly. And, when I like the way you said micro outsource, because a lot of times, these are processes that are core to your business and, you want to retain it within your control. So where this kind of, model is different is Joe works on your systems, on the customer systems, on the customer platform. The data doesn't go out of the customer platform. It's on resident there. It coordinates with other business users on the customer platform. So literally, you are outsourcing the activity of keyboard strokes in many ways. So Joe comes in, works as part of your team, and leaves at the end of the day.
And because it can be done quickly, it is in 2-3 weeks to deploy a process, and the returns, if it costs 2x to run a process manually and it cost X to run it through Joe, actually that's an X increase in return delivered 3-4 weeks later.
Absolutely.
And it starts to build momentum. Is you start to identify more processes that Joe could operate on, and it starts to build the roadmap. But it means that benefit is being realized in weeks as opposed to months or years.
Correct.
It creates a new degree of scalability and agility. And so we talk about this. It is, we talk about it as outsourcing. There is a key difference that you mentioned, is it's absolutely, you are in control of that process. So you are saying, well, actually, we get 100 referral forms, or we get 100 service requests every day that take us 5 minutes to load onto a system every time. We're going to give that to Joe, but Joe's working on your systems, comes into work, is within your domain, which gives you a number of security and compliance benefits, as we also established with Power. Tell us how Joe comes into work, Ramesh.
So think of hiring Joe for a process just like you would hire a remote worker. What would you normally give a remote worker? There would be an access into your system, either through a VPN or a username, password if it's a cloud-based system, and that person would need an email ID. That's all that Joe requires: username and password access for the system, and an email ID for Joe to transact. The reason you need both is obviously Joe needs to access a system to perform the transactions, but everything that Joe does is completely audited and audit trailed. So if, let's say, Joe processes 20 invoices in the system, Joe will create an output report saying, I processed invoice 1, successful; invoice 2, this was the data element, successful; invoice 7, I couldn't process because I couldn't find a purchase order number. And Joe will put that on the sheet. And at the end of the run, Joe's going to send that report out to everybody using the customer's email server itself. So from a data privacy security point of view, not only are the transactions done, but even the operational activities of emailing and notifications, etc., use the customer system. So think of it as a remote worker coming into your systems, performing the tasks, and leaving. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Now, as we kind of draw things together, so very quickly, because I can see we've got a couple of questions here that I want to get to, and yeah, there's a good one here for you, Ramesh. You'll like this one. So productivity lock is the inability to get to that 30% of working hours spent on data entry processing within systems, and the inability to do it with software transformation. RPA, robotic process automation, can release humans from repetitive work, and it can do it quickly, but it's not just as simple as just buying a bot. Doing it the traditional way of buy the software, put it on infrastructure, wrap some analysts and project managers around it, takes time to deliver ROI, and it creates that change queue, and it creates that delay on returns, which is what perpetuates productivity lock. A fresh approach, micro outsourcing, can accelerate that deployment and return, which makes it possible for even the smallest organizations, or the organizations not geared up to large scale transformation. It means that they can release some of that cost and capacity that's tied up in productivity lock. So we get to the questions. So we have a first question here: is if we're talking within an organization and we have somebody who can see the possibilities, how do we get the rest of the organization on board? I think this is something that we deal with very regularly. So,
yeah, it's a great question, actually, Richard. Purely because of the fact that resistance to change can often be a blocker for any new initiative. But in this case, the good news is that we are not changing the way people work, but probably we are introducing something in form of a technology that is becoming part of your team as a digital worker. So what we've seen is the best way to get this going in an organization is to choose a process which creates a big business impact. And when you do that, and when that is automated, and people have seen the impact of automation, and that impact is them being freed up from their boring activity to be performing something more productive, they then become the advocate for automation themselves. So they go to other departments, speak about it, and talk about the benefits. So unless you get that internal momentum going, spreading it within an organization is going to be difficult. So choosing the first process, where it needs to be deployed and who's in charge of that, I think in some ways becomes key, because that then becomes a precursor to the list of possibilities that you have within an organization.
Yeah, and I'd reiterate that. And actually, once people have seen that first process, things race forward. The other thing that I've found when we've talked to organizations is there's usually quite a lot of, and rightly so, there should be some skepticism around claims of new technology. But actually, once people get to understand how it works, we quite often will do this in a short workshop with a leadership team, of showing what a process is today and what it can be on the other side. I think the penny drops for a lot of people that, why have I mean, we did it in a sales call center, is why have we got salespeople doing data entry for half an hour, 45 minutes every hour, just to get a price proposal out to a client? Is if we could free up that half an hour of every hour, then they could get 2 proposals out. And you start to see where actually it's better to have a robot doing the tasks that make somebody feel like a robot than it is to tie down that expensive resource.
Exactly. But also, Richard, a very key point there is what you said in your last slide. It's not just about buying a bot. I think very important here is the way you approach it, because if you're going to an organization, and if there is a huge cost involved before you even start discussion about the possibilities, or there's a timeline involved, then it's a different equation. Here, with newer business models like the ones we are talking about, organizations have the option of not investing anything literally, but looking at the possibilities and getting an automation in place and seeing it in action before they start paying for it. So
is overcoming that objection from finance and IT is quite often but actually is that fact that they're not paying anything until the process is approved and ready to go into production.
Yes, I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, that gets past a whole bunch of objections. Got another very good question here, which I think we'll just about get in, if people have got the patience to go through it with us, is how do frontline staff respond to working with robots?
Again, it's an interesting question, because it depends on 2 things actually. Yeah, one, the kind of activity they're doing. Where let me give an example. If it's a customer services task, for example, and typically customer services tasks have a habit of piling on, and you need to get through a backlog, and especially when you go on holiday, it builds up a backlog which you need to then solve. In those kind of activities, it's great because Joe can just trudge through it, and with you get it going, and they're able to clear your backlog by the time the person arrives in the morning. I guess the second part of it, which gets slightly more trickier, is where you have critical processes. So let's take, for example, a construction company where you have certain processes where you have a 24-hour deadline to resolve it, right? So, and you have people who have to, not only get the task processed in the system, but like you said, have people who actually need to go out and do something critical on the field. Now, in these kind of processes, what is very important is to build a level of robustness, and where you make sure that nothing falls through the loops, that there is no missed action, there is no missed task, which even if it does, it gets picked up by a secondary line where it doesn't fall through the cracks. So I guess how the reaction of frontline staff depends on the type of process and the nature of its criticality. And the answer to that is we build in the required level of resilience into these tasks to give them comfort. And that's where that part where you train Joe to do the activity and the redundancies you build in becomes very important in any process.
And I'll just finish off by saying it's a bit like any co-worker is trust comes from working together. I think Power was an absolute delight, and I think we had a mixture of skepticism and I'll believe this when I see it, to, well, actually if Joe can, then great, because some of the work was not particularly popular within there, but actually the moment that they can see I don't have to do this, Joe is doing it, you starts to create that trust. Joe becomes part of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that was huge for us. And we suddenly went from okay, if it can, why wouldn't we let Joe do it, to now, right, Joe's so good, can Joe do this? Could Joe have a look at this? And it's kind of, okay, let's do this in a controlled manner. But yeah, that trust builds very quickly.
Very quickly, absolutely. And initially, even if there is an initial skepticism, that quickly fizzles out when you see Joe actually in action.
So I guess we've gone slightly over, but with some great questions again. As before, this will be available to view on demand. I get the recording that will come through later on this afternoon, and we'll get it loaded up on YouTube so that you can come back and review anything. Thank you very much to everybody for spending the time with us this afternoon. Have a great day. As ever, thanks, Ramesh, for coming along and sharing those insights with us. Hugely valuable.
Pleasure, Richard, and thank you everyone again for attending this session.
Okay, so thanks very much, everybody. If you have any questions that we've not answered, please email them to me, Richard at optsm.co.uk. That's it for today. Thank you very much for your time.